Ron carries the Jenkins name well back into national yacht history. Herb had a wonderful style to deal with all kinds of difficult matters with a deft touch, and so it continues in the family. Ron is an active nature and sailing photographer. When hobbies do not interfere, he works in technology marketing. In the technological area, Ron is our webmaster. He weekly records the sessions, although I think that's being done a little differently now, and uploads them to our web, in addition to loading our schedule and any other pertinent information. In photography, since COVID began, he daily posts an interesting little puzzle of a picture on his Facebook page and asks people to see if they can figure out what it is. We probably have maybe a 50% guess rate. Correct guess rate. He's an active participant in Waterfront for All and a coalition of groups that protects the Toronto Waterfront. We really need that. Ron's topic today is the Polson Iron Works. The Polson Iron Works was a large and productive shipping enterprise in the late 18th and early 19th century, operating near what is now today the foot of Parliament Street. While most of its output no longer exists, some of it is still in use today. Today is the 12th time Ron has spoken at Shellbacks. Please give Ron a very warm Shellback welcome.
Hello, it's good to see you people today. We're going to be in between snowstorms, which is perfect. I hope you can hear me. So today I'm going to talk about the Polson Iron Works, which was a significant shipbuilding operation on the Toronto Waterfront for about 30 years. And I'm just going to see if I can jump my slide down. I guess we need to make that my active screen. Hold on a second. So the Polson Iron Works built large steam engines, tugs, ferries, barges, dredges, and motor yachts for the well-to-do, and ultimately naval vessels for the First World War. It started in Coburg, Ontario as an engine builder, moved to Toronto in 1883 and became the Polson Iron Works Company. In 1888, it moved up to Owen Sound and carried operations there for a short period because they had a property tax exemption. But when that disappeared, they moved back to Toronto and settled in on the north shore of the Inner Harbor. Eventually, they had an agreement in 1914 to lease land from the Toronto Harbor Commission to locate on a new facility being built in the Portlands, what we know today as Polson Pier. But they never actually located there. They ended operations before that, and the pier didn't open because of delays and because of the war and technical delays with the pier itself. And then the Polson Iron Works location was vacant for a while and eventually covered in lake fill in the late 1920s. So here's the Iron Works, a section of it as it looked in 1914, and what you can see are a variety of ships of different sizes and so on. And another view here of another building. These rail lines were running all the way across the Toronto Waterfront at the time. This is a later photograph in 1929, and what you can see back up in here, well, you can see it all the way across the waterfront, is new lake filling going on. So this whole section is newly filled land And Polson Iron Works had been located right where that finger's pointing. And the Polson Iron Works had quite a lot of output. I don't expect you to read all of this, but in Toronto, first they were building wood yachts. And then up in Owen Sound, they switched over to steel construction. And if you look at the years, that's from 1889 to 1892 or 3. Then they moved back to Toronto. And this is their output here. And here. And here. And here. What you see in this is really that they produced about 150 significant vessels in that time. The last production that they made, as you see here, from 1917 to 1919 were minesweepers and cargo ships for the First World War effort. And then the last 2 items were canceled. They were cargo ships for a Norwegian manufacturer or a Norwegian shipping magnate, Hanevig. So they produced a number of notable vessels of the past, and we can take a look at a few of those now. The first of these was the Manitoba, which was a significant ship for several reasons. It was built up in the Owen Sound location. It was a 303-foot long ship. It looks like they just decided to prop it up with trees while they were building it. I can't really conceive of how a 303-foot ship was built there, sitting like that. But you know, these are the photos. This was the flagship of the CPR's Great Lakes Fleet. In case you're wondering why Owen Sound was a place to build ships, it was also a rail terminus. So if you were coming from, say, the Thunder Bay, you'd take a ship down to Owen Sound and then take a train down to Toronto. And that ship used engines and boilers from a previously wrecked ship, the SS Algoma. And that's what it looked like in its completed form. A pretty significant ship. This was also the first steel-hulled ship built in Canada. And also at the time it was launched, it was the largest ship afloat on fresh water in the world. And that ship was in operation until about 1950. When it was taken out of service because it was going to be hard to bring it up to code. After the Noronic fire in Toronto Harbor, standards changed for shipping of this type of boat. This is another ship built in Owen Sound, more typical sort of carrier, freight carrier for lumber in this case. A 200-foot freight carrier, nevertheless. And back in Toronto, this was a warship built in 1905, the Vigilant. This was Canada's first home-built steam-powered warship, and also the first armed vessel to be built in Canada. You can see that sort of ramming bow that was the kind of thing you saw in First World War and pre-First World War ships. This is the Bluebell being launched. This was one of the, a good set of ferries, sister ships, Trillium, Primrose, and Mayflower, all named after wildflower names. The Bluebell was launched. Does anybody know where you'd find it today? Yep, you're not quite on the island, but on the Spit. There it is in the harbor in 1906, or 1920, sorry, built in 1906. Here it is out here on the Spit of the Leslie Street branch of the Leslie Street Spit. Looking in a little closer, you can look at this on Google Maps and actually see it. right there. And if you are at water level, it looks like this. When the water is right, you can see some of the bollards and the shape of the fall. Yes. I think it was probably just used as. Yes, the question was why was it put there? And I think it was just shielding to prevent erosion on that part of the spit. Here's another piece of construction from Polson Iron Works. This was a dredge called the Port Nelson, which at the time of construction was thought to be the most powerful dredge in the world. It moved up into the Arctic and worked for a few years, but was eventually wrecked by a storm. The next year, though, were a couple of dredges built, the Cyclone and the Typhoon. And these were massive dredges, as you can see. These were hydraulic dredges, so they had a kind of an auger that dug down into the bottom and pumped the slurry up through pipes to wherever you wanted to deposit it. Yes. It did add land to the islands, to the Toronto Islands. It was significant in the formation of the island airport. And a lot of the portlands, what's now portlands, was lake filling created by this. And I've got another picture that I think is particularly interesting. This is the old National Yacht Club building under construction. And this is the dredge operating in this basin, probably about 100 feet away from where we are right now. Dredging out this basin, dumping lake fill up to form Bathurst Key. Right here, this is all just sand dredged up from where we're standing. And you can also see this little object here in on the edge. That is that little lighthousey sort of thing out there on the breakwater. Polson Iron Works also built a train ferry. This one is in the foreground is number 1. They built number 2, which is back here. These train ferries went from Coburg to Rochester, back and forth carrying coal. And the train cars just loaded right onto the ships. So each of these ships could carry 30 standard train or coal cars of 70 tons each. And then they had an upper deck for passengers. There's the open transom where the coal trains, the cars would just load into the back through there. And the upper deck was the passenger deck. You can see the dining room here, what it looked like. Then in the war, they started building trawlers. These were called battle class trawlers. They built 6 of these. And several of these saw service in both World War I and World War II. In the interim, they were sold and used for fishing boats. There's a better example of one of these. So there were 12 of these built by the in the war effort, and 6 were built at Polson Iron Works. And they also built minesweeping trawlers, slightly larger boats. Of these, there were 60 built in Canada. This is number TR16 here, and if you look back a little further in the picture, you can see other hulls under construction. And Polson built 4 of these, 16, 17, 18, and 19, creatively named. And these ones also, as you can see, were equipped with armaments. There's a cannon up on the bow, and there's one that's a little harder to see back here on the stern. But again, these were easily converted after the war to be fishing vessels. And then another element of Polson construction is the roller boat. How many people have heard of Knapp's roller boat? Yeah, I thought there'd be a pretty high. Frederick Knapp had an idea. And there are some sketches and patents. This is the roller boat here. It's under construction up in the top. And here it's being inspected after launch. Basically, it's kind of like a floating paint roller. If you need an analogy. And these pieces here were supposed to give it traction on the water to propel it along as it rolled. Now, as nautical folks, I think we can all say this didn't have much of a chance of working. But he managed to convince people, and it had a couple of coal engines inside at each end. You can see inside here, basically the interior was on rollers and just kept level while the outside rolled. And that's how it worked. It was tested out here in Toronto Harbor in 1897. Okay. Oh yes, it was 110 feet long and 22 feet in diameter. It was substantial thing, but this he thought was going to be the small version. He had bigger plans for things that would go 60 miles an hour across the ocean. He had oh yes, the question was what kind of cargo would he be transporting? He thought that it could be troop transport for one thing, and then later train transport. That you could actually drive a train in the hole at one end and squirt it out at the other or something, right? But there aren't very many pictures of it in actual operation, but this is actual operation. It was a calm day, but you can see the water coming off the paddles there as it rolls along. And it's pretty glassy, as you can see in the Toronto Harbor, and that's actually a good thing. Yes.
Where would the
I'm not really sure how the hell you would steer that thing. And I don't think that was ever really, let's call that to be solved later problem. But he did move down to the boat down to Prescott, which was his hometown. And that was actually difficult in itself because they ran out of fuel somewhere around Scarborough. Had to go ashore, get more coal, bring it back out, and then they ran out again, had to tow it the rest of the way. What you can see here though are that they have actually extended those fins the full length of the cylinder now. Yes.
Let me have the mic on it just so I can
Yeah.
ask the question. If, just clarify for me, this boat will roll like this. Is there sort of a loose inside that will stay level?
Yes. Yes, you could, I'll just jump back a couple of slides and you'll see the inside there. You can see it's on wheels. The whole inside is on rollers in here that would go around this track. That's the ingenious part of it. You can see the rollers here too in this picture. Right here. And then you have a couple of late Victorian women out there on the foredeck. Yeah. Well, you know how it is, like whenever you've got an interesting powerboat and a foredeck, you have women there. Like so. I didn't take this picture. Anyway, there they are. Yeah. Anyway, the boat did generate a bit of skepticism. Down in Prescott, it tried to cross the river over to Ogdensburg, which is about a mile. And you can see here, this little press report says, Knapp's roller boat demonstrated its ability to roll today. In a blinding snowstorm with a stiff north wind, it rolled from Prescott across the St. Lawrence River to Ogdensburg, but missed the channel to the upper harbor and rolled into the soft mud on a bar abreast the city and settled hard, surrounded by snow and ice. So not very effective. In answer to the question, how would you steer it? The answer is probably not. Later on, too, it was down in Toronto Harbor, and you'll see it looks a little different here. I'll explain that in a moment. But again, it ran into a little problem here, broke adrift in 1907. And this is the Globe reporting that the Knapp roller boat, which is about to be converted into a coal carrier, broke away from her moorings at the end of Polson Iron Works Company's wharf around 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning and steered a direct course for the Turbine Steamship Company's dock at a speed from 5 to 6 miles an hour. Not a soul was aboard, and without any power of her own, she made about as good time before the wind as she did when aided by her engines. So, yeah, it was a bit of a laughing stock. It was converted, and this shows the conversion. It was intended then to become a coal carrier. It looks more like a submarine, but it wasn't. So they closed off that bow and made it a point, put some kind of a steering thing up here, and the idea was it would be propelled this way rather than bowling. But it never got off the shore again. This is sitting aground at Polson Iron Works in the winter. You can see ice in the foreground. And here's another view of it. Now, at this point, you see some of the metal work has been taken off the boat. It's starting to be taken down for parts. Off in the background here, you can see St. James Cathedral if you're looking for an orientation for the photograph. And another photograph helps orient things even better. What you can see here is the terminal warehouse, the Harbor Commission building, those still exist. Right in here is the Quassint going across the harbor. And this is all lake filling that is happening now. So the roller boat is sitting here just off the western edge of Polson Iron Works. And looking sad. That whole area was filled in, of course. Here's, you've driven under it many times, the Jarvis Street viaduct going, the train line goes over and Jarvis Street goes under, and there's St. James Cathedral there. So the roller boat at this time, 1927, would be behind us by maybe a couple of 100 feet and being buried. And in fact, that's what did happen. So this diagram, I've drawn in the shoreline at the time, 1923. And that was the 1923 shoreline that was then filling into the modern shoreline over here. So the roller boat in its location right here, this is the Polson Iron Works buildings here. Is right there, and if you take a look, you can see this is Lakeshore Boulevard and the Gardner Expressway right here. And this locates it a little more precisely. Again, what you see here, I've identified the modern shore. Right there is Parliament Street slip, and you come across on Queens Quay and you curve up there. And if you go up This area right here, that's where it is. That's where it is to this day. You've driven over it many times. It's between 8 and 15 feet underground, apparently. Maybe some ground penetrating radar would actually give you a precise location. Yes. This is, let me just see. This is Lower Jarvis right here. This is Lower Sherbourne here, and this is George Street here. So this is your neighborhood. Yeah. So you're living pretty close to it. Yep, so you're pretty close to the location of the roller boat there. And then we talk after the sadness of the roller boat about some boats from Polson Iron Works that are still in service today. One was a private vessel, still in operation now, the Rambler, 1903, and it's in beautiful condition up in Muskoka. It was built for the treasurer of the CNR in 1903. It's had multiple owners and multiple restorations over the years. It was converted from steam to diesel in 1949. That's the Rambler. It is a beautiful thing. The Big Wind is another. This was the ferry over to Big Wind Island on Lake of Bays. It was a resort Big Wind Inn. Does anybody recall Big Wind Inn or in there? Yeah, so a little bit. This was originally built as a private boat, also for use on Lake Muskoka, but was then sold to Big Wind Inn and shipped over in 1925 and became the Big Wind livery boat to get over to the island. One of a couple. It went through a restoration in between 2002 and 2012. And yeah, it went back into operation. That's what it's looking like these days. Like that. So it's back in service and working. Here's another Polson Iron Works boat still in use, the Trillium. You may have traveled on this one. This is it being launched in 1910. It was owned by the owner of the Hanlan's Point Stadium. It was a ball stadium over on Hanlan's Point. So he had a very good business model because he could charge people to get on his ferry and then charge them to get into a stadium. And it was a profitable arrangement until the city thought it was too profitable. They forced him to sell the ferry to the city. And at that point, he said, if that's how you're going to do it, then I'm going to build a different ball stadium. And he built the one over on Stadium Road. So now the fans weren't going over to Hanlan's anymore. The city had bought an elephant that he turned white for them. And that was how Maple Leaf Stadium got there, and Stadium Road to this day. Yes, the Trillium stopped use in 1957 and spent about 20 years sitting in the lagoons. A lot of parts were stripped, but it was restored in 1975. Brought back into use. And there it is in a modern photograph. It's wider than any of the other ferries that run to the island, so it has its own slip on the city side. Another Polson Iron Works boat is this little tugboat, the Bachawana. It worked in Toronto for a while, went down to Hamilton, became a dive boat. In 2008, it was purchased again, brought back into Toronto. I don't know if it's in the water now or not, but it was a survivor in a lot of ways because it wasn't getting any tender loving care to stay on the water, but there it goes. Here's the Quasend, Polson Iron Works again. Built in 1912. This is an early photograph of it. Cost them $13,000 to build at the time, and it was a steam powered vessel and then converted to diesel in the 1940s. And of course, yes. Yeah, the question is about the Hiawatha. The Hiawatha is actually older than the Quascent. It was not built by Polson Iron Works, it was built by Bertram, which was over here in 1895 is when the Hiawatha was built. So that's another topic for another day. But anyway, but no, they're sort of sister ships, but they were not built the same. And the Hiawatha is a bit smaller than the Quascent. This is a pair of engines that were in a Polson Iron Works vessel called the Wanda 3. And the thing about the Wanda 3 is it represented kind of the pinnacle of private ship engines at the time. This was a triple expansion steam engine in this private vessel, the Wanda 3. Anybody know what a triple expansion engine is? Couple people. So I'll explain it. Basically, when you have high pressure steam, you use it to push a piston. And instead of venting that steam, which is now dropped in pressure, you put it into another piston, a larger piston at a lower pressure, and get some more out of it. And then into a third piston before you finally vent that steam. So you're getting extracting the full pressure value out of that steam in 3 steps. And that's why it's called a triple expansion engine. Yes.
Is that why, when they use turbines? That impractical?
I don't know, a turbine would be like a diesel.
Steam turbine.
Yeah, yeah, I think these were just straight mechanical pistons. In these vessels at that time. I don't know when the steam turbines came in. But the Wanda 3, built in 1915, had this steam engine in it. It was removed not all that long ago, and electric engines were put in here. And the Wanda 3, as it looks now, is that. And it was built for the Eaton family. It was number 3 of the Wandas. Number 1 was the fastest boat on the Muskoka Lakes until there was a faster boat. And then Timothy Eaton wanted to still have the fastest boat, so he built Wanda 2 to be faster than whoever was faster than him. And then again surpassed. Wanda 2 was also lost in a fire, and Wanda 3 was built as a faster replacement of Wanda 2. That's the one that had the triple expansion steam engine in it. So this was how the Eatons would get to their place. They'd take the train up to Gravenhurst and then get on their boat and go over to the cottage. And the story is that Margaret Eaton, who had the boat after her husband had died, stopped using it at the point when some young woman at their cottage had a burst appendix and they wanted to take her in for care and they couldn't get her there fast enough. And she died en route, and apparently Margaret Eaton wouldn't use the boat again. But there it is, looking pretty good. It was built for speed, 94 feet long, 12 feet wide. So a sliver. But it could do 24 knots, which was pretty damn fast in, 1915 Muskoka terms. Yeah, for a 94-foot cottage boat. It's not like a pontoon boat now. Then the Polson Iron Works had some other products. They built boilers and steam engines, and that was a continuing secondary business. In fact, a lot of the ships they built put those engines into the ships, but it wasn't exclusively for ship use. If you look here, you can see Casa Loma under construction, 1911 to 13. And in the tunnel between there and the stables, you'll find boilers. These were the boilers built by Polson Iron Works to heat Casa Loma. And then another interesting thing in the Polson Iron Works was a plane that they built, an aircraft in 1915. It seems, from what I can tell, that they only built one, so it was more or less a prototype. But it was one of the first all-steel airplanes in the world. It was a steel frame construction at the time, and planes would generally be built with wood. And you can see some of the design here and the construction. You can see steel ribbing in here, steel frame in here. It didn't, as far as I know, get beyond the one plane. Would have been interesting. I guess it's like the Avro Aero of 1915 or something.
Did it ever fly?
I don't know. I have been hard pressed to find any real information about it. Yes, the question is, did it ever fly? I'm sorry. Yes. It looks like it would fly. I imagine it did. And as I was pulling information together, I was coming across artistic renderings of some of these vessels. This is the Manitoba, again, that boat in Owen Sound. Just a postcard here again. What you get is a keepsake of voyage, but you can see substantial boat. It was a 3-masted boat, not that they used the masts, but that's how they built them at the time. And this boat had its masts through its life up till 1950. So there you go. Somewhere in this picture too, it exists. You can see it was part of the Upper Lakes fleet of CNR or CPR, sorry. And in this list, you have the Keewatin, the Assiniboia, the Manitoba, the Athabasca, and the Alberta. Somewhere up in here, the Keewatin, of course, still exists, but the rest of those don't. This is a contemporary painting of Knapp's roller boat. It's looking a lot more energetic in this picture than in photographic evidence.
Artistic.
Yeah. And it shouldn't say cyclone drawings, that's my mistake. There's the 1 to 3. This is Ontario #1, the coal ferry, train ferry by Moonlight, Port of Rochester, New York. And then there were a few paintings of things that the Polson Iron Works done by Robert Ford Gagan in 1918, showing the construction. These paintings are in the Canadian War Museum now. Rather good paintings, I think. And this is another by a different painter, also in the Canadian War Museum, the launch of the War Algoma, one of the cargo ships built at the war. So why did the Polson Iron Works finally fail? And it failed kind of quickly. The shipping industry itself was a difficult one because it was a fluctuating industry and it had a high capital requirement. And although the city of Toronto worked hard to support it, and they wanted to develop the portlands and the Ashbridges marshes and so on, the war came along So that whole harborfront development plan from the Toronto Harbor Commission that was formed in 1912 was held up. And as a result, the Polson Iron Works was kind of geographically constrained where they were located. They didn't have much room to expand. And they expanded to the east a little bit, taking over another pier, and to the south as much as they could build their wharfs, but they were limited by what were called the windmill lines. The city had developed a planning guideline for the harbor, how far out the wharves could be built from the shore. So they built out to the extent they could, but there was a problem with that, as the water was still too shallow. Also, there were federal policies that made it difficult. The shipyards were not protected the way that the railways were. So the railways got protection from competition, particularly from the United States. And then when it came to this First World War, the government took over control of shipyards, said, you know, and now you're going to build ships for us. And they said, basically, you know, you're going to build cargo ships, trawlers, cruisers, and so on. And you're not going to sell product to neutral countries because we want to guarantee that steel and manufacturing capability for the war effort. So as a result, Polson had contracts that they couldn't fulfill and they lost those contracts. When the war ended, the contracts were gone and there was no ongoing demand for new cargo ships because nobody was sinking them anymore out on the oceans in the war. So that was a shame for that. So that's what I have to say about Polson. I had a couple of other screens. I was gonna show you that windmill line. It's just this is an old photograph, 1834. And what you can see here is a line drawn. This is from the Goodervan Works windmill. They had a windmill here on the shoreline. It was a landmark in the early 1800s, till about 1850. They used it for grinding. And the line that they drew went over to here, what's called military reserve. That's really the point of land just inside Ontario Place. So that that line, kind of arbitrary, was the line limiting the extension of wharves, is what that writing says. They were not allowed to build past that line. And that line, if you look at it today, is there. This is where Fort Rouy was located. Actually, it's right about there, that old French fort on the exhibition grounds. And this basically was a visible straight line from where the Portland started over here. So everything, all of this is lake filling. Yes.
The location of the windmill is outlined in the paving in the distillery.
Yes.
So you can go and visit the windmills.
I want to do that to get the exact GPS location so I can draw this exactly. That's my best guess right there, but I'm probably a few feet off.
I can get it. Send it to the balcony.
Oh, okay, that would be great. That would be great. Yes, the comment was that the location of the windmill, which disappeared around 1850, is marked in a marker on the ground or in the Portlands. And the Portlands in the distillery district. I'm sorry. These are old insurance maps for that area of the city at the time. This is the 1893 map. And down in here, you can see it says Polson Iron Works. I don't have the ability to zoom in right now, but there it is. And it's held back on this line. The line changed a little bit later. You can see his plan to change here in 1903, and in 1910, the line had changed. So in fact, these wharves were extended further south. Oops. So this is new addition between 1903 and 1910 here to a new windmill line. And in 1913 again, they're still built out to the maximum, but that's all they could do. And those are just some references. And oh, then when we talk about, this is not Polson anymore. This is J.J. Taylor's. Margaret could tell you a lot more about Taylor Boat. But this is J.J. Taylor's building in the war effort in the Second World War. Building a submarine chaser, launching it right over just on the other side of the parking lot here. And, so this is the Western Gap right here. Yeah. And that's some of the frame construction going on. There's some. Diagonal. That line.
What's the big guy?
This is King Street. It still follows this line. It takes a bend here and then it goes up and over the Don River right here. Yeah. Let's see what street. This is Ontario.
It bends at Berkeley.
Berkeley. There it is. Yes, that's what it says. Berkeley's right here. Yeah.
Interesting launching meeting channel.
Yes. It changes a lot. At this point, it had not really taken its current form. Yes, the comment is about the Keating Channel, that it changes over time. So in 1893, it was looking like this. It changed with the Portland's plan. You'll see it changes here and then changes again. Probably you'll see a right angle turn now at the Keating cut. That's part of the Ashbridges Bay story. Yes.
Last night I had a conversation with a friend who talked about the only ocean-going ship that ever visited the Don River above Queen Street, which would have been in the 90s.
Right. The comment is about an ocean-going ship visiting north of Queen Street, because of course that was lake filling. Couldn't have been north of Queen.
When they were trying to make the Don River into a canal.
Right.
And straightening it.
You could actually at one point take the Keating cut straight through over to Ashbridges Bay. Yeah, I covered that in the Ashbridges Bay talk, but maybe we'll come back to that when I talk about something else. Any other questions?
Well, we won't talk about.
Yes.
I was quite interested in seeing the Great Lakes. They're on it, they have on it. I'm familiar with the ham on it. They're on it. Instead of going and realize there were more than that.
Yes, so this is commenting on some of the passenger vessels on the Great Lakes. The Upper Lakes fleet had a few, and then there were the Harmonic, Neuronic, and a couple of others running in the lower lakes at the same time. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'll give you the microphone so that our online people can hear you.
No, I remember hearing about the Neuronic and burning, 1949? I would have been 10. But I did many trips on the Neuronic and the Harmonic. And there was one, I think I was about 8. And the captain invited my parents and myself. to join him at the captain's table for dinner. And he also escorted me in, this 8-year-old, to the table. And it was a large group of people, including what I could figure out were women traveling alone. There were some other couples that had met my parents. And then when it came time for the dance after dinner, the captain asked me to dance. And I can still remember the looks of some of the women glaring at me because he picked me. And it's only in my later years that I realized he made a good choice.
That's quite a story. Yes, Margaret.
My memory of the Narani. Captain on the Narani was Captain Taylor. And he and I shared the same birthday, slightly different years. But, September the 1st. When he was leaving that time, my dad knew him, and he said, I will go on the inside of Pie Island and took the horn when it was off of our cottage. And he did just that. To wish me a happy sometime. And then he went down to Toronto, and that was his last journey. Nice
That's a
story.
remarkable story too.
He should run around and.
The Naronic was such a disaster at the end. That's terrible. That's another story too. Here's Diane.
Many stories. And thank you, Ron. As usual, you presented just a wide scope of what that wonderful company did during the late 19th, early 20th century. And some of which those boats are still here and looking amazing. I have the honor of giving you the first pin of the year. I forgot to give it to our guest last week, and we'll have to send one out to him. Just a little token of our appreciation.